1 o'clock on the dot. But before I start everything, I do have some handouts, and you can totally ignore this if you would like to. But if this is something that you're interested in, I have a couple of resources on the bottom that you can kind of look through a little bit more. And it's just a very basic outline about what I'm going to be talking about today. So I'll just give you a couple, maybe pass it down. But, oh, thank you. Not a great hander outer of things, and so this might take a moment. There's a lot going on outside. It's nice and cool. Love that. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. A lot going on outside. So I am so glad that you guys took a break from all that fun and came to hang out with me for a little bit, talking about girls and how to teach them who they are, talking about identity and all of those things. We are going to be talking today about how to teach a girl who she is. My name is Cindy Koch, and I have had a really long morning. So bear with me as we begin talking about this topic. It is one that is near and dear to my heart. My morning started at 3:30, waking my 17-year-old daughter up to take me to the airport after I found out yesterday that my beloved car is not coming back to life at the mechanics. So I usually drive myself to the airport like a big girl, but this time I had to rely on my 17 and 15-year-old to get me there. And you know, if you've had girls, that getting them out of bed at that age is a little bit more difficult than you like. Get to our beautiful Santa Barbara airport, and there's ice on the plane. And we barely know how to pronounce that word because it's Santa Barbara, right? So everybody freaks out. Plane's delayed for like an hour. We're switching flights because, of course, you know, Santa Barbara to Phoenix, not that far. No, but you got to have 2 flights and a layover somewhere. So I barely got here. So I ran to the bathroom. I splashed some water on my face, and I came and took a breath. But the whole time, like, I'm thinking about this. You know, I'm going to come talk to you guys, so I should probably have something prepared. Just kidding, I totally have something prepared. But I'm thinking about, you know, what we're going to talk about this morning. And I'm like, the whole time that all of this is happening, you know, changing flights, I don't know if I'm going to get here. I don't know where I'm going to end up today. I don't know if I'm going to have a car when I get home. You know, all those silly little things that just go through your mind. The whole time I'm like, wow, God, what are you trying to teach me here? What did I do wrong? What are you punishing me for? Or what, you know, what do I need to think about differently? But the whole time, this idea of who I was before my Lord, coming to him in prayer, was at the top of my mind. And you know, that's not normal. You know, I mean, we're here at Best Practices. All of us are probably somehow involved with church, faith, teaching the faith to other people. And to us, that's normal. But to think about who you are with your God on your side, it gives a whole different outlook to your life. Because in the end, I knew I would be fine. I would end up somewhere. I would probably have lunch eventually. But in the end, I would be okay. No car, no airplane. I might not even make it here to talk to you guys, but it would be fine. We know where we're going. We know what we're looking for. We know who we are. And we have a problem today because we don't always have that assurance now that our girls know who they are. I never thought I would have to answer some of the questions that they're coming up with, right? I didn't even ask, you know, I didn't ask these questions. I was not a good teenager. You know, I pushed the boundaries a little bit. But the questions that my girls are asking today are so far beyond what I could even conceive that it probably takes a different perspective on what is going on with the world and how do we teach our girls who they are in a climate like today. I got a lot of girls. Okay, ooh, technology, we're gonna see if this works. There they are. They're in the picture, there's only 4 of them, and there's the little boy, he's number 5. But I do have another one who is not pictured there as well. She's older. So 5 girls between, at this time, well, she's pretty little there. During COVID, let's talk about that time. Between the ages of 13 and 23, there were 5 of us, well, I was number 6, 5 teenage-ish girls living in the house at the same time. We had lots of conversations about what it was to be a girl, what it meant to have an identity, all of these things. And question of identity started coming up in different, I was a little girl, but the question of identity started coming up in different ways for these girls in my house. And so I got a lot of theories about teaching things. I teach a lot of different things. I'm not really good at the handing out of paper thing, right? I'm not that kind of teacher, but I teach a lot of other things. I teach women's Bible studies all the time. I run a CrossFit Kids program, so I'm constantly creating a program for them to go from little tiny 5-year-olds up into their adult fitness, lifting weights, doing gymnastics, those types of things. I homeschool my kids, and so we've done everything from algebra to art projects to things like that. So I've been creating curriculum and things so that children can move through this experience of education for as long as I can remember. Actually, funny story. My husband and I, before we were ever even talking about getting engaged, we were talking about the theory of education and how we would do it if we were in charge. And we weren't even dating or anything like that. So that's kind of like how weird and nerdy I've been thinking about this for a really long time. So I got a lot of thoughts, I got a lot of theories, got a lot of things that I'm thinking with education. And one day, as we were in the car, I was thinking about this subject, how my girls learned who they were, kind of how they learned to explain, my 15 and my 17. And so I looked at my now, the 2 that drove me here this morning, my 15 and my 17-year-old, and I'm like, so girls, how did you learn the difference between boys and girls? I don't know what I was thinking asking that question because I was bracing myself for the answer after I heard it out of my lips because, you know, we have a great relationship, and so they might tell me things I don't want to hear. So I just kind of waited, and they thought for a moment, how did they learn the difference between boys and girls? And my younger 15-year-old, her name's Naomi, she turns to her sister, and she was like, oh, do you remember that book? And the other one was like, oh, the book! And, you know, I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, I don't remember what book you're referring to. So I'm like, how did you, you know, what are we doing here? And then my son was also in the car. He's 13 years old. He's like, no, that book? And so what I come to realize is they have learned the difference between boys and girls. You know, they do everything together. Like I said, we do CrossFit and stuff like that. So they're constantly competing with one another, that kind of thing. And there was this book when they were little, as I come to find out, that it was hidden under like my son's pillow, and then it was hidden in his hamper, and then it was hidden like in his drawer and stuff like that. And I'm like, what is this book? And it was this cute little, maybe you've seen it, it's kind of an older book, Why Boys and Girls Are Different. And he was like mortified every time that he found this book because it went through, you know, just the basics of boys and girls, you know, nice, plain and simple. And they were like, yeah, that's how we learned the difference between boys and girls. I was like, okay, all right. So in my mind, it actually solidified the theory that I had been thinking about this whole time. I'm like, brilliant, it works. And so I am going to share that based on experience with you today. Like I said, I've been thinking about education for a long time, and I came across this paper given by Dorothy Sayers. You might have heard of it. If you're involved with classical education at all, this might ring familiar, The Lost Tools of Learning. So she gave this paper in 1947, and it goes through kind of an examination of the medieval style of education. You know, there's a lot of smart people back in the day, and her thing was like, how did they do that? And what are we doing wrong, differently, whatever? The problem is we're turning out people who know things, maybe, but they don't necessarily know how to think. And so her whole thought was, how do we design an education that creates thinking individuals? And this has been something, like I said, I stumbled across it. I don't know how I found it. Totally interesting. But what she does is she divides how we learn into 3 stages. And she goes through nice and easy, and you'll see it on your paper there if you have one, the grammar stage, dialectic stage, and the rhetoric stage. She says in this paper, is it not the great defect of our education today that although we often succeed in teaching our pupils subjects, we fail on the whole in teaching them how to think? They learn everything except the art of learning. I took this to heart for pretty much, like I said, everything that I've been doing in an educational way, and really teaching the kids how to build off of the things that we give them so that they can not just do what we tell them, but actually learn about who they are and express it in a way that means something. So I wanted to go through these stages, just how she lays them out, and see if they can apply to how we can teach our girls who they are. So the first stage is going to be the grammar stage. This is exactly what it sounds like. It's grammar, it's language, it's definitions. It's, if you're learning a language, you're gonna learn what that word means, right? If you're learning mathematics, you're gonna learn what 2 is. CrossFit, if you're doing any kind of physical education, you're gonna learn what a burpee is. You're not gonna like it, but you're gonna learn it. And if you're doing faith, the Christian education, you're gonna learn who Jesus is. You're gonna learn who the Father is. The most foundational definitions of the language come in this stage. But it's not just definitions. It's kind of how this language fits together as well. So you have words in a sentence. You're gonna learn there's a noun and a verb, a thing that does something. And so you put those kind of things together and you're able now to speak in basic ways a language. Like CrossFit, we learn what an AMRAP means, as many rounds as possible. And so the kids know whenever they see that word, they just keep going until coach says stop. And so you're learning how to use the language that you've been given, right? Putting it together. You're learning what 2 plus 2 means. You're just putting those numbers together. And so this is a foundational basic learning to every language that you could give a child. This is kind of nice because it works with the developmental stages of kids. Like, think about a preschooler. You don't want to go into, like, you know, some sort of high mathematics with a little guy like here. You just want to say 1, 2, 3, and they say back 1, 2, 3. Yes, we're all on the same page. Easy. Children were built for this kind of learning, right? Memorization, stories, nice, simple things that they can just say back to you, and you're like, good job, you got it, you learned it. And so we do this, like, you can think of like catechism, right? What do? We just teach them the Bible stories. Just teach them simple things. This is this. They're like, yes. This is this. Yes. There's nothing back and forth, right? That's just pure grammar, teaching them what it is. Dorothy Sayers, back in her article, says, what the material actually is only of secondary importance. But anything and everything which can be usefully committed to memory should be memorized in this period. The modern tendency is to try and force rational explanations on a child's mind at too early of an age. And I think we should take that to heart a little bit. Remember, we're taking these stages apart to see how children learn anything, how any of us learn anything. If we were to go out and try to learn a foreign language right now, what would be the first thing you would have to learn? Grammar. Grammar, thank you. Audience participation, love it. You would have to just learn some words, right? Hola. You would have to know what that meant before you could move forward in the language, right? You would also, no matter how old you are, start at the grammar stage. So even though it does work well with younger children because they're naturally there. It's also where we would all start with anything new that comes our way. All right, so the next stage then. This is the fun one. This is the one that I think we just like to skip over, but it's very important, the dialectic stage. This stage now is where you're taking the foundational knowledge and you're trying it out. You're pushing the boundaries. You're using kind of logical things in the world to see if this grammar actually works. So, for example, with a little bit older children, after they learn, the building blocks, like 4th grade, you know how they get really annoying? They start asking all those questions, you're like, I don't know. Like, where did you even come up with that? This is exactly what they're doing, and this is a good thing. This is the next stage in learning, is they're taking just that information and seeing if it actually works in the real world. So you get into a little bit higher mathematics here. You can get into, this is when kids start getting sarcasm. You know how all of a sudden it like clicks in their mind? And they're like, oh, you're using a word differently. I get it. Or like jokes. They finally understand all that stuff. This is that great stage where there's a little bit of nuance to the language, and they're trying it out too. They're trying to, like I said, push those boundaries a little bit. Now, this can get a little bit scary, because what happens is that people start, teachers especially, start getting like, why aren't you listening to me anymore? What happened to that cute little kid that is just saying everything that I said to you? Now you're coming back at me with these questions, and you're calling me out on things that maybe I didn't even think about, those kind of things. So this can be a pretty scary stage for a teacher. But rest assured, it is a very good stage for the child. This is where faith gets really scary too. Because this is about, like I said, that early adolescence age into teenage years. It can last a long time, where kids now are like, I don't really believe this. Mom, why do you make me go to church? Dad, This is the attitude of, again, pushing back on those boundaries that they maybe had not really thought about before. Good things. Great place for conversations. Great place for them to push back on those things, because now they're going to learn what those words, what those things actually mean for them. Dorothy Sayers says, attention should be focused upon the beauty and the economy of a fine demonstration or well-turned argument, lest veneration should wholly die. Criticism must not be wholly destructive, though at the same time both teacher and pupil must be ready to detect fallacy, slipshod reasoning, ambiguity, irrelevance, and redundancy. This is the time when the student is going to come at the teacher with all kinds of new things. But the teacher has the opportunity to be like, whoa, whoa, whoa. That's not part of the grammar that we learned. What we're doing is building off of the previous laid foundation. So even though there is that exploration, there's also a check and balance with how far that grammar can go. And the child is pushing that boundary as they should. We should do a lot of creative things in this stage. And it does kind of go along with that early teenage age group, right? And so once they get a little bit more creative with where they're going in life and things like that, and they are just naturally pushing the boundaries, we can see their education kind of coming out in those same ways as well. The last stage that Dorothy Sayers talks about is the rhetoric stage. And this is the one we just want to jump to, because this is the fun one. This is the one where you are expressing what you have learned. We always want to jump over that dialectic stage where it's hard and rough and sort of pushing those boundaries things, but now this is the expression of a truth. This stage is, if we're talking about, let's say, a language, for example. We've learned the grammar, we've learned how it fits together, we've learned all the nuances of the language, and now you can write papers and you can give your own speeches and things like that based on what you've learned before, the building blocks. The rhetoric stage is like the end goal, especially for faith. So we're teaching and building all of these things for our children. They get a chance to play around and push the boundaries, and the expression of that faith is what we want. That's why we're doing this, right? So that they know who they are, they trust their Lord, and they can speak it to other people. That giving and expressing to other people is what the rhetoric stage is all about. So this has worked really well in all the different disciplines that I have done, in my life and with my kids and with other kids and those kinds of things. However, it's not without problems, especially in our current world. During COVID is one of those times where we had a lot of self-reflection, and we were, I don't want to say trapped, but kind of trapped with the people whom we love for a little bit too long, a little bit, if you had children, they showed a side to you that maybe you wanted to kind of escape from a little bit. Maybe I'm just talking about myself, but we had lots of conversations with all of these girls as we were locked together in the house. There was one time in particular that she was 19 at the time. Now she's 20, she just turned 21 2 weeks ago. But at the time, she was in the kitchen. She was right in the middle of this rhetoric stage. And I had heard words coming out of her mouth that I had never heard before. So we were going back and forth about something, and she just stood there, and she looked at me, and she's like, "That's your truth. What about mine?" And I was like, I don't even understand those words. What does that mean? I didn't say this out loud, of course, but in my mind, it's just like running over and over again. Like, what does that mean, your truth? Where did you get? I didn't teach that to her. So what I started realizing, the more that I was talking to these girls, they had learned a different vocabulary that I wasn't aware of, that I didn't teach them. And I homeschooled them, so I taught them a lot of stuff. And so my thoughts were, where were they getting this? What are they basing this off of? We did a little poll for this session in the app, if you did it. And the question that I asked was, what was one of the greatest challenges to our children's identity? And a couple of the answers, well, I'll just tell you the one that y'all picked the most. Social media was the one that came up as number one, the greatest challenge, in your opinion, about what our children's identity is faced with today. Some of the other ones that I put in the poll there, one was family dynamics, there's another one that was pretty good that got, what was it? Peer pressure, yes, thank you very much. Peer pressure. And then the one that got absolutely no votes was I can't remember my words. Morality, yeah, moral values is what it was. And I thought that was interesting because I think what's happening today is we have a different foundation that we're dealing with that actually has its own set of moral values. So when I say moral values, we're all thinking Christian values. But that's not necessarily how everybody sees morality these days. So what I would like to do is kind of take apart maybe what these kids are faced with, not that we've taught them, but what they've been dealing with from the world. Our challenge in the grammar stage is, like I found with my daughter, the vocabulary, first of all. She was talking about this truth. When I say truth, I'm understanding truth as God, objective truth outside of myself. The way she was using that word was something inside of her that I couldn't touch or feel or know, her truth. And so there was a disconnect in what we were just even talking about as far as that word was concerned. What is truth? Something else that I came across, gender is no longer defined by the body parts you have. We have this separation it's a vocabulary difference of what gender and sex mean. I kind of feel like we didn't have that even like 10 years ago. This has been a new vocabulary that we are dealing with in our greater society. Authority. I'm going to talk in another session about this problem of self and the authentic self and how that kind of is messing with who we understand ourselves to be. But very quickly, the self has become all authoritative, and anything outside of self is immediately seen as the oppressor. And so the oppressor says something. If myself does not agree with it, then for whatever reason, I am being oppressed. And so what's happening is an external truth cannot speak to the internal person anymore. We are set against each other. This is all, like I said, a vocabulary issue, because when we say self, we understand different things now. When we say truth, we understand different things now. When we say authority, we understand different things now. And the authentic self, being authentic to who you are, you be you, do what feels right, all of those things. This now is the God that nobody can touch. This is what my girls have been learning. And like I said, I didn't teach them that. It wasn't from me. And so I'm trying to understand how this grammar is getting into their identity and what we can do about it. So there's this really great book. It's on your paper there, Strange New World. If you have not heard of it or read it, totally recommend that. This is Carl Trueman. He says, I'm just going to read one of his quotes here. The use of a word deemed hurtful or denigrating becomes, in the world of psychological identity, an assault upon the person, as real in its own way as a blow from a fist. And this is where religions, especially religions such as Christianity, that hold to strict codes with regard to sex and sexuality, will end up in trouble, because they are going to find themselves in a world that operates with what we might call a different grammar and syntax of identity. For example, when the Christian objects to homosexuality, he may think he's objecting to a set of sexual desires and sexual practices. But the gay man sees those desires as a part of who he is, his very essence. The old chestnut of love the sinner and hate the sin simply does not work in a world where sin is the identity of the sinner and the two cannot be separated, even at the conceptual level. He's a philosopher who is taking what has happened, the shift of what we see as culture and identity, and he's charting it through like Nietzsche and Marx and all of these great thinkers. And then we've arrived at a place now where this has become a real problem with identity, where the self now is in charge. So our challenge is not only in the vocabulary, in the grammar stage, but we're also going to see these challenges in the dialectic stage as well. So the next stage is where we're taking these grammar, these basic things that we've learned, and we're starting to push the boundaries of it, right? So if our girls, boys, our children have learned this is what these words mean, now they're going to take that and say, okay, how does this really work? They're going to try to stick it against the wall. And so our society has kind of allowed for a lot of things because of a couple different things that you guys picked up on, right? Social media, technology. When you take something real and physical and you run up against a wall, the wall is going to stop you, right? Our problem now is we have this world that isn't real, tangible. And so when you take things like, I want to be a butterfly, and you put it into that world, there's no wall, right? You can actually create a butterfly in that world, and you can be it. So we have this problem with a cycle of reality where we can dream it now, and it will be. But it's not just virtual reality. Our technology is so good right now. It's a blessing in a lot of ways, but it's also a curse. Our medical technology has gotten to the point where we can actually physically change our flesh. We can replace hormones. This was not something that was done very well, at least 50 years ago, right? And so we have gotten to a place now where the technology is so amazing that we can actually create flesh. We can create ourselves. This is a challenge because now we're taking a different vocabulary and we are pushing the boundaries that actually don't have boundaries anymore. There is nothing there. Our social aspect. I mean, COVID was a prime example of that, right? Zoom exploded. We could have FaceTime relationships with people who lived, across the world, and it was just as if they were in the same room. Amazon is wonderful, defeats space and time to give you whatever you want on your doorstep in like 24 hours. It's great, but then at the same time, we're losing a piece of real reality in our lives. And we're just, in any way, wherever you are, we're all kind of just okay with it, and we're moving along. There is another fantastic man you should read. His name is Neil Postman. He's written a lot of books. I have one article listed on the resources here that he wrote. It is 5 Things We Need to Know About Technological Change. He wrote these things several years ago, and so they're coming true in ways that he probably would have never seen coming. He says this: the first idea is that all technological change is a trade-off. I would like to call it a Faustian bargain. Technology giveth, and technology taketh away. This means that for every advantage a new technology offers, there's always a corresponding disadvantage. The question, what will a new technology do, is no more important than the question, what will a new technology undo? Idea number 1, then, is that culture always pays a price for technology. And like I said, your poll showed that you understand this in some way. Our culture is paying a price right now for the technological advances that we're experiencing. The last problem that we're kind of dealing with now is the rhetorical issue. Now that the culture has redefined the language, pushed the boundaries a little bit, now we're expressing ourselves in ways that we've never thought possible and maybe are not that great. A great and terrible example, if you've ever read through the book of Romans, the very first chapter is kind of like a window into our very same situation. We see a people who have changed the grammar of their life, and then they pushed the boundaries of what that grammar means, and they ended up confessing an entirely different reality than God had made for them. I'm just going to read a little bit of this for you. It's Romans 1, starting at verse 20. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. So they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. Therefore, God gave them up to the lusts of their hearts, to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshiped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. And if you know this part of Scripture, I could go on and on and on because it gets into all those like sexual sin desires and things like that. And God gave them up to the passions of their heart. And so this is a great example of what we can see from a kind of a distance, where a whole culture of people did this. They redefined who they were. They pushed the boundaries, and God let them. That was actually their judgment. So what we're seeing here is we're dealing with a culture that has learned a different language, is pushing this in a different way and is expressing themselves differently. It's kind of not a surprise when we just look at how people are educated, what we have done to educate in other ways, and what we're doing now. The question is, can we do it differently? How can we teach our girls who they are? So, those are my girls. We have a good time. I think the biggest thing that we have to do is we have to think about each stage, grammar, the dialectic, the rhetoric, in the language in which we would like to teach them, and not be afraid when they push back from this. So how to teach a girl who she is? We're talking ultimately about teaching her her identity. And so with anything that we do, we're going to start with the grammar of the faith. Now, I'm assuming a lot of things here. Because you're here at this conference, I'm assuming that you want to teach the Christian faith. If not, that's a different conversation. We can have it afterwards. But I'm just going to assume that's what we're doing here. And so what that means is we're basing this language off of what we've been given to understand the grammar of our faith to be. We're going to use the trivium model, just like we have for all the other things we've done. The language of the Christian faith is what we find in the Word of God. He's defined a lot of things for us. Read Genesis, man, woman, God, who he is, his son. Anything that we can kind of find in those catechism classes, he lays out in the Word of God. That being said, the small catechism is how we teach our children the faith. That doesn't stop. We need to keep remembering all of that vocabulary of who we are and who God teaches us we are. The confessions of the church. We have that big book of confessions. If you don't know what that is, we can talk about that later too. But that's all kinds of good stuff where people were using the vocabulary of the faith. And this is where things were getting pushed back, but we use it now to understand what these words mean and what our confession means in these kinds of times. So these are all just very basic grammar of what the Christian faith is. The most important thing that I think, especially for our girls, is they need to hear this story. It's one thing just telling them God means this, Jesus means this. But if we can get them all caught up in who they are as a child of God, from the very beginning, who they were made as a woman of God, if they hear this story, they don't have to express it yet, over and over again. That's a good thing. This actually is, I have written 2 books, and this was the whole reason I wrote these books. I started them when my 21-year-old daughter, we were talking about, the one that was yelling at me in the kitchen, that one, when she was 18 months old, I looked at her and I was like, oh, I know what's going to happen. She's going to hear a different story. And so these books have been a long time in the making of just trying to tell them who they were. And so the one that I have is Woman, the Forgotten Story, taking the Genesis account all the way through Revelation, talking about the beauty and wonder of what a woman has been made. Not just physically a woman, but forgiven. And we're going to see each other in paradise, you know? So that is our identity as a woman. But then I realized I had a lot of little girls too. And so I wrote this book, Daughter. And it's just kind of a pared down version of the same thing, has color pictures and everything like that. But the idea being is that girls should know their story simply, easily. It doesn't have to be some big, how do you feel about anything? Just, this is who you are. And I know this sounds like, oh, that'd be great if they were all like 4 years old and you could just tell them the story. However, I told you about my other daughter who wasn't in the picture before. So I have 4 daughters that are my own. And I do have a 5th daughter who, she's not actually my daughter, not adopted, anything like that. But she just ended up sleeping on my couch more than she was going home, probably about 4 years ago. And come to 2 years later, she's in a bedroom with my other 3 daughters. They're all stuffed in one place. Very suspicious of the church, very suspicious of the Christian faith. But there she was in my home. My husband's a pastor. We go to church every Sunday. We go every Wednesday. I'm like, you know what? I mean, you live here. This is what we do. So you're coming with us. Take her to church. She doesn't like it. She has so many questions, but she's so angry inside as well. Every week, all she did was she just heard her story. Kicking and screaming, but she heard it. Now, like I said, it's been about 4 years since we found her on our couch, and she comes regularly up to the rail every Sunday to hear that she is forgiven by Jesus. There's still a lot of pushback with her questions and things like that, but she was 19 years old hearing this for the very first time, and how it applied to her and how it was her story. Whether she liked it or not, it was still who she was. So even though we're telling a story to somebody who's not in that really nice little stage where they just listen to you and they don't say anything back, it can happen at any time. Like we talked about learning a language, you don't only have to learn a language when you're 3 years old. You can learn a brand new language when you're 88. It still works just as well. So the telling of the story is part of the grammar, the foundation of the faith. But the next stage we get to is the dialectic stage. And remember, this is the one that's the scary one. This is the one, especially when we're talking about faith things, or when we're talking about how to teach a girl who she is, where it can get a little bit dicey, because what she is going to do, what she should do, is she should push back a little bit. She should rebel against this. She should say, really? That's what a girl is? Is that what I am? I don't feel like that. I've had this conversation before, right? Oh, you don't feel like a girl. Okay, well, let's talk about that. What do you mean by not feeling like a girl? Well, sometimes I don't feel like a mom. Oh, all right, so maybe feelings aren't really who we are. So who are we? Who have you been made? And guess what? You can kind of have this conversation if you've entered into the ground floor, the foundation of a grammar. Oh, I was made by God. What does that mean? I'm a creation of him. How did he create you? What did he give you? What kind of gifts do you have? Do you always feel like what you see? No. Does that matter? Maybe not. Are we always happy? No. Does that mean you're loved any less? Not at all. So you can have those conversations. You can kind of go out on those limbs because you have a strong foundation of the grammar of the faith. I do this podcast with my kiddos. Maybe, oh, there they are. Aren't they cute? I love looking at pictures of my kids. Isn't that silly? So dumb. So we do a podcast. We're actually starting to do it every week now. And it's not just my kids, it's the kids from church as well. And this is all we do, is we just take a subject and we push the boundaries. And so we've talked about, this is actually where this whole conversation came from. What's wrong with the world? And it was one of the high school boys that went off on identity and how is he supposed to know who he was in this kind of a world. And so we talked about it. That's a great question. We should talk about it. And so I think people, like I said, are kind of scared to talk about these things, or maybe don't know how to talk about it because maybe we're worried about like damaging the faith. Well, if they have a strong foundation of what those words mean and the story that just keeps continuing to be told, you don't have to be afraid. They don't have to be afraid. You can ask the questions and it will be okay. So this is what we do. We ask, we question, we explore. Back to this, the dialectic stage. This is a great opportunity to introduce apologetics into the conversation. Apologetics is the defense of the Christian faith. And so when those things start coming up, like, well, I don't know why I didn't do that. Well, it's on there somewhere. There it is. Defense of the Christian faith. So when things come up like, well, how do we know if the Bible's true? Can we trust the Bible? Can we trust what Jesus says? Those sorts of things. What about 7-day creation? Is that really a thing? Like when you start getting those questions that are kind of scary, there's a whole realm of information, Christian apologetics, that is a great way to kind of maneuver through these things while going back to the grammar, the story, what we have been given in God's Word. So, last stage, our favorite, right? Rhetoric. This is when it all comes together. This is exactly what we're looking for. We want our girls to express who they are. We want them to express the reality of being a woman, but more than that, we want them to be able to trust in the gifts that they've been given. Remember, they've heard this story from the beginning that God did something for them. This Jesus guy came and sacrificed himself so that she could live. In the rhetoric stage, when she's hearing the stories, when she's kind of playing around with all this information, we want her to trust it herself. So when she starts having those questions and those feelings where she's not good enough or she doesn't understand who she is, we want her to remember that she is chosen, she is loved, and she will live forever. We want her to trust her faith. Also, more than that, we want her to be so confident in it that she'll tell others. And then lastly, that she can even teach about what she has been given. That's what we are looking for. That is the goal with all of our teaching. So how do you teach a girl who she is? We take it from the beginning. We teach her the grammar of the faith. We allow her to explore the edges of the faith. And then by that, she'll be able to talk about who she is as a woman and who she is as a child of God. Now, the harder part is, what does it mean that she is a child of God? What is her real identity? Is it just that her gender is female? Actually, it's more than that. It is that on a base grammar level. But what do we know about everybody whom Jesus has died for? We're all sinners. None of us has anything of worth that will make us anything better before our Creator. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, and all are justified by His grace as a gift through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus. The center of our identity is that we are baptized, we are forgiven, and we are loved. And so no matter what we feel, no matter what we even do to our bodies, it doesn't change our identity. And this is the whole thing that we've been teaching her the whole time. Yes, she is a girl, but yes, she is loved, no matter what. This crafts our conversation into the gospel. The battle for her identity is that she is chosen and she is a child of God. So what was once like just a narrow understanding of this is a girl, this is a boy, and God said so, the gospel like breaks everything open in that we want our children to understand that they are loved by their Creator. That starts in the grammar stage, and it goes all the way through, no matter where they end up in the rhetoric stage. So my own daughters, they've been all over the map with all their questions, with their boundaries, and we're not all the way through. Like I said, 15 and 17 drove me to the airport this morning, and I know there's a lot more coming, and I have lots of friends who have been on both sides of the spectrum with their girls, with their boys, with what they've been going through with their children. And the best thing that we can do is teach our children who they are in Christ, because it's all going to be okay. no matter what they do or where they end up, they are going to be beloved for eternity. All right, that's all I got for you guys, and thank you very much. Please, if you have any questions, I would be happy to address a couple of them. Yeah, what do you got?
Are your books here at the conference?
So I have a couple. Oh, come visit the Ringside Preachers podcast table. I have a couple there. And we can, hey, maybe they'll have you on the podcast too. Ooh, terrifying. Just kidding. What's that? Ringside Preachers. Yeah. So I will have, it's over by the playground, kind of by where the Concordias are on the other side there. So I have a couple there if you would like. And also that QR code, it goes straight to my website, and that has the books there as well. So you can do that. But any other questions about stuff? All right, thank you guys so much. Enjoy your day.